AFC North is always a race to the finish line. Just within the division, it's a gauntlet of a schedule. A year ago, it was the Ravens winning it all, a 12-5 season ending at the hands of Buffalo. That's who they opened the season with in 2025, by the way. Meanwhile, the Steelers still sorting through their quarterback conundrum. They'll face their former one in New Jersey as Justin Fields commands the Jets offense. The Bengals have to get out to a hot start, right? They're trying to avoid another playoff miss and a chance to start 2-0 for the first time since 2018. More on that in a minute. And how could we forget Cleveland with quarterback controversy of their own? So much to talk about when it comes to the AFC North. So let's do it with our good friends, our two-time Super Bowl champion in Bryant B-Mac McFadden, and our Super Bowl covering NFL reporter in Tyler Sullivan. Guys, certainly appreciate the time. Let's start our conversation, though, with the Ravens. We're just going to kind of bypass the regular season kind of here because it seems like no matter what with the Ravens, they always find their way to the postseason regardless of the schedule, but it's the playoffs, B-Mac, where things get a little bit interesting. So when you look at the 2025 schedule as a whole here for the Ravens, they get the bye week in week 7. They kind of get a little bit of a break there as they face teams that finished under 500 there after the bye, but it gets kind of tough there the first week of the season, B-Mac, or the first start to the season, I'll say. So how do you see the Ravens faring to get the season started?
Once again, another successful year for the Ravens. I have them winning 12 ball games, but it's safe to say the hardest stretch for the Ravens is within the first 4 ball games. Traveling to Buffalo, Haley, Tyler, and then traveling to Kansas City. In both cases, I have the Ravens losing both of those ball games. Week 1 is like the week of unknowns. You're playing against a very, very highly talented team with a high-level quarterback on the road in Buffalo. I see that as a loss. Bouncing back on track against Cleveland, Detroit, and then traveling to Arrowhead Stadium, I see that as a loss as well. But when you look at the middle part of their schedule, when you look at games against Houston, Rams, Chicago, Miami, Minnesota, Cleveland, the Jets, Cincinnati, and in that first game against Pittsburgh, I see the Baltimore Ravens taking care of their business against those said teams. And then when you factor in what we usually see happen with this AFC rivalry with the Pittsburgh Steelers, regardless who the quarterback is for the Pittsburgh Steelers, they always find a way to split against the Baltimore Ravens. And that second game for Pittsburgh and Baltimore, that's the final week of the season. And if everything goes accordingly, Tyler, it's safe to say Baltimore may rest a lot of their key contributors for that ball game, which will make it an easier path for the Pittsburgh Steelers to win that ball game, to get that split that I mentioned earlier. And the same can be said for Cincinnati. So once again, another successful year. 12-5 is what they had a year ago, win-loss record. I see them doing the same thing for this upcoming season as well.
Yeah, it's a good point, B-Mac. If you look at that Week 18 game against Pittsburgh, they could easily rest starters. I actually have them winning that game, but if you lose that game, then I'm right there with you in terms of the prediction. I have them actually at 13-4. I think this is going to be one of the best teams in the AFC yet again. You still have Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry. You add DeAndre Hopkins to that offense, and we saw defensively last season, they turned a corner. They were abysmal to start the year, bottom of the league in most meaningful categories. You look at the second half of the year, they were number 1 in the NFL. So the answer of who the Ravens are defensively is probably somewhere in the middle in terms of where they were in 2024, how they ended it, and how they're going to be in 2025. The thing that I look at, and you referenced it, B-Mac, so tough out of the gate, going to Buffalo for Sunday Night Football. I actually think they're going to win this football game, though. I think they're going to go into that hostile environment and pull out the win in the upset, because you got to remember how last year ended. All the drops from Mark Andrews, the playoff struggles continuing for Lamar Jackson. They nearly were able to edge it out, but just some mental mistakes prevented them from advancing into the playoffs. I think they're going to carry a massive chip on their shoulder into that game to have a statement win that I actually think will come back around when we're talking about number 1 seeds and potential tiebreakers later on in the year. It could be a very important Week 1 win for Baltimore.
We'll have to see it play out. That is certainly an exciting matchup, though. You got the 2 MVP finalists last year in Lamar and Josh Allen going head-to-head, so we'll see that on Sunday Night Football. Guys, I know I'm not the only one in saying that I am begging the Bengals to start the season strong. It has just been so tough to watch over the last couple of seasons. Thankfully, the schedule makers trying to throw them a bone this season. They get the Browns and the Jags. Sorry, Jacqueline, to start their regular season off strong. But
yeah, we play the Bengals tough.
yeah, okay.
I
All
was
right.
just making that up.
We gotta stay. We gotta stay on time here. So we'll keep the Jags commentary to a minimum. But
I have
Tyler,
a whole other segment. I'm sorry.
when
It's coming.
you look at the Bengals, a brutal stretch on Thanksgiving. It's going to be a true test there for Joe Burrow. It's still no good news as well. We got to talk about Trey Hendrickson. Give us a temperature check here on how you're feeling about the Bengals going into 2025.
Yeah, it's really funny because I've kind of been bashing the Cincinnati Bengals throughout the offseason for what they weren't unable to do on the defensive side of the ball. Of course, the Trey Hendrickson situation is still ongoing. But then I'm going through the schedule and I'm like, win. And all of a sudden I look up and they're 12-5. And I'm like, how did they get here? The Cincinnati Bengals. And you referenced it early on in the season. If they do not take care of business against the Browns in Cleveland and the Jaguars, and also I'll throw the Vikings in there with a young J.J. McCarthy getting his feet wet in the NFL in week 3. If you don't take care of business out of the gate, then we are firmly putting this entire season on notice for Joe Burrow, for the head coaching staff and Zach Taylor, all of it. They should be able to start off hot. And overall, I love their offense. If they are what we saw at the end of last season, where they were going on this dramatic run to try to get into the postseason, Joe Burrow on his own and Jamar Chase are going to win a lot of football games. Now, the question is, and it's very similar to what we were talking about with Baltimore, can they actually replicate all of these wins into the playoffs? I have my questions about that because of that defense. I think they'll win shootouts when it gets to the nitty-gritty of the playoffs. If you don't have Trey Hendrickson, if you're really relying on Shamar Stewart, who had 4.5 sacks during his entire collegiate career, I have my doubts.
And for me, that's why I'm going in more of a lesser direction with Cincinnati than you, Tyler. I see them winning 9 games. Now, you guys talked about the schedule makers threw them a bone this year to start their schedule off. Well, heck, they threw them a bone a year ago. Remember, week 1, they played against Jacoby Brissett and the New England Patriots at home, and they lost. But we talked about how bad they've been to start the season off. I really believe they were overemphasized getting off to a better start. So I see them coming out the gate 3-0. But then you look at some inspired defensive, offensive teams with balance. Detroit, Denver, Green Bay, and of course, their rivals in the Pittsburgh Steelers. I have them losing those ball games. And I think they get back on track in that stretch against New York, Chicago. Usually split a series with Pittsburgh, but I have them getting swept this year with Pittsburgh. And then, of course, finishing off with Baltimore, and then finishing off on a good note when you look at games against Arizona and Cleveland. But I have them winning 9 games this season, and it's a lot to do with Cincinnati doing Cincinnati-like things, losing the teams they shouldn't lose to, and how much improved will their defense be, especially if you're having a disgruntled Trey Hendrickson, or even worse, Trey Hendrickson not even in a uniform for Cincinnati.
Yeah, the things with Trey Hendrickson certainly escalating in a direction you don't want it to go. Last time we heard, he said things are getting a little personal, and they have not come to an agreement there. So certainly something to keep our eye on. Also, a random fact that I don't know how much this really matters, but the Cincinnati Bengals will travel the fewest miles this season. I only mention that because the Commanders did that a year ago, and they made it all the way to the NFC East title. I am not saying that matters, but just a fun fact to keep on your mind as the Bengals get their season underway. Let's talk about your Steelers, though, B-Mac, because as we know, they have never had a losing record under your head coach in Mike Tomlin. However, that quarterback question continues to loom, and it just seems like the longer the offseason goes with those question marks, it's kind of feeling a little bit, I'm not sure when it comes to Pittsburgh. They also will face 3 of the 8 teams that made it to the divisional round of the playoffs last year. B-Mac, are you nervous at all about this season, or are you trusting that your head coach will figure it out regardless?
Well, I'm trusting in terms of regular season success. That's never been an issue for Mike Tomlin, regardless who's been at quarterback. And I kind of went through their schedule, Tyler, under the assumption that they may have Aaron Rodgers and they might not have Aaron Rodgers, because that's the reality of the situation. But I have Pittsburgh going 9-8, another winning season for Mike Tomlin. You look at how they start the season. I really love those 2 games. You travel to MetLife to play against the Jets, rookie head coach Aaron Glenn, and then you get Seattle at home with Sam Darnold under the helm for them at the quarterback position. So I love those matchups to start the season with or without Aaron Rodgers. And then, of course, you have Cleveland, Minnesota, Cincinnati, Green Bay, very, very intriguing game. Indianapolis, they should be able to take care of their business. And then it gets really, really dicey when we look at the final stretch. You have Chicago, Buffalo, Baltimore, Miami, Detroit, and then Baltimore again. I mean, that's a very, very difficult stretch to end the season. And we also saw a similar like schedule with them in 2024 and how they ended the season as well. And they didn't handle that gauntlet as best as possible. So I think we see some of the same like errors on the football field for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but in all, I see them winning 9 games, losing 8.
Yeah, the Pittsburgh Steelers by far are the toughest team to gauge when we do this exercise, right? Because we don't know the most important position. We don't know if Aaron Rodgers is going to come out of the darkness and say, you know what, I'm going to the Steel City, I'm going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, or he's going to say, you know what, I'm going to stay in the darkness for a little bit longer. I'm calling it a career, which makes it really difficult to kind of figure out what they're going to be. For me, I'm treating it like they're not having Aaron Rodgers because right now they don't. Right now it's Mason Rudolph as their quarterback projected to be the starter in week 1. And to me, that results in the first under 500 season for Mike Tomlin, which is crazy to think about. But I think this is a 6-11 football team with Mason Rudolph as their quarterback. Now, if it's Aaron Rodgers, it's a different story. But I even look at week 1, B-Mac, and I say, you know what? If there's a revenge narrative, I think the schedule makers are trying to make it Aaron Rodgers versus the New York Jets. It could be Justin Fields against the Pittsburgh Steelers and him coming into that game with a little extra motivation to try to beat up on his former team that benched him over Russell Wilson. So I look at that and go, oh boy, this could be tough sledding if you're losing a game out of the gate to the New York Jets in New York. And as you referenced me, Mac, at the end of the season, look at that in week 10. You're starting on Sunday Night Football in Los Angeles against the Chargers. Then it's the Bengals. Going to Chicago against a much better Bears team with Ben Johnson as head coach. You face the Bills, the Ravens, even the Dolphins on prime time, and then the Lions in Detroit. That's real dicey. You're talking about a possibility there of 1, maybe 2 wins. So again, this is really tricky here for Mike Tomlin because he's always been that guy to have a high floor. Right now, I don't know if that floor is really high.
Yeah, remember, too, the Steelers will play the first game in Ireland as well. They'll take on the Vikings overseas in week 4, so a good gut check there when it comes to just dealing with the schedule as it comes. Let's wrap up our conversation talking about